Ja, also einige Bemerkungen ganz zum Anfang. Ich bin hier auch alleine, ohne Moderatorin, Moderator. Würde ich Sie bitten, jetzt einfach
So I was asked actually not to use this chat function. If you have then questions, there will be then time, of course, to talk about all that. So this is going to be quite important. So of course, the gender appropriate language, this is of course important thing in Germany, probably in Germany not so much. So anyway, so when we talk about fighters, of course, I mean, of course, then men and women. But anyway, so that then I will use actually the old way, the old school. I would maybe then use gender language, which is probably focused on men. And then, of course, we're going to talk about dropouts of former fighters, fighters in general, so extremists. So these are all then concepts that are going to be overlapped. So in this presentation, I would like to maybe then to use different kinds of concepts. I will use probably different kinds of concepts. And the same thing is actually with the concepts of disassociation, disengagement, and deradicalization. These are then probably then concepts that are maybe overlapping, and actually, so I'm going maybe to deal with the right definition. I think that we'll use different kinds of concepts. Yeah. And then something about a social and cognitive process of reorientation, about different pictures, the photos. So this is the photos that are taken from Fighter for Peace. This is the organization I work for. And these are different photos from the Lebanese civil war. These are not photos from IS fighters. This is something I wanted to stress out. Something about myself. I'm a political scientist. I'm a journalist. I'm also filmmaker, and I've been living here in Lebanon since 2014 and 2015. I funded Fighters for Peace. This is an organization that I founded together with some other members. So it's a program management and international relations organizations. And since 2015, I have been supporting all the different fighters within the Lebanese civil war and accompanied former fighters. So the use of dropouts in tertiary prevention. So within right-wing extremism, so we can say that in Germany and in Europe we use these concepts, but so we also talk about Islamic extremism. So my question is that to understand why we do that, and so we believe that IS, Islamic State, is a kind of new phenomenon in Germany and in Europe. That's why so we have a distancing and disengagement and deradicalization process that take time, that take probably some years, and so it takes really then years before so then drop out from this kind of IS organizations are then totally distanced and deradicalized and disengaged. So there are some former Islamic fighters that that then have been taken care of within the tertiary prevention. My question is that there are also some geographical contexts, and we can also work with some people coming from different geographical contexts. This is going to be probably some very important things. I also think that within right-wing extremism, but also within Islamism, especially with IS, the Islamic State, that these groups are particularly then networked at international level. This is going to be further more developed, and IS is able also to recruit actively people from Europe, and so they have invited all these fighters to come to Iraq, for example, and it's for me very clear that this is an international network, and that's the reason why there's a particular then organization at the base. Intervention should work also more internationally and should be also more internationally networked, and we should also then use potentials across borders, going beyond the borders. These are potentials that haven't been exploited so far. So there are also some other geographic contexts that are particularly impacted by extremism. There are also some dropouts, so that could be then also then dealt with within the tertiary prevention. We reintegrate dropouts much more. Before we really then focus in on this topic, I'd like to present our organization, Fighter for Peace in Lebanon. This is a very particular organization because in this organization there are fighters from the Lebanese civil war. Many of them have gathered, and many of them have, suffered the civil war and were enemies, but now they're working together in the same organization in order to overcome this Lebanese crisis, in order to set up different peace processes. They're sitting together at the same table and also working for prevention. Yes, how do we work as an organization together with former fighters from the civil war? We support, so of course, then this disengagement, distancing processes. My work was, of course, to support all the different dropouts from the civil wars, and we was also then to have a self-reflection of these people. We have to also then to consider critically about their biography work. And so our organization has a safe space, or is a safe space, with like-minded people working out new identity strands and creating also then new perspectives for these people. That's why we often support these people in order to find a new identity, in order to find a new life perspective, in order to find a new kind of life. And there's also a very important thing, so a new role as a peace maker. So especially a lot of people that have participated in the Lebanese civil war have now become then members of our community. How do we support the former fighters in tertiary prevention? So we have also then very clear example from Tripoli, and you can see that this is taken from the conflict between 2011 and 2013, and this is a conflict that hasn't been totally solved. Tripoli is the second largest city here in Lebanon. The conflict, as I said, took place between 2011 and 2013 between the different religious groups. So there were two hostile groups, and there were also then individual talks, and also then there were also then group talks. So in order to establish a dialogue, in order to have also possibility to build trust, and also then trying to really create a kind of a narration and dialogue. And then when we stepped in, we wanted to gather people. First of all, there were, of course, separated, and then, of course, we had the possibility to listen to their feedback, so they could tell us something about the conflict, and then we analyzed the causes of the conflict. And there were some workshops in order to understand that there were more similarities than differences, and because this was the real basis for peace building. Very often when you talk, when you narrate about the conflicts, you understand that there are more similarities than differences. There were many, many more things that were bringing us together than things that were separating us from one from another one. So that's why we wanted also then to analyze the conflict in order to establish a kind of a roadmap to reconciliation. And that this was, of course, for us the basis for a peace building between these two different groups. So there was a core group that is still there today. So that we were to also to support them and want to accompany them over the years in order to have a real reconciliation within the city of Tripoli. You can see so here then our commitment in fighters for peace in Germany. This is primary prevention. Yes, so we talked about Germany as contemporary witnesses with young people with a migration refugee background. So they have been working for 3 years with schools, especially with persons with a very strong migration background, so with migrants, so with refugees, and so with our fighters. We were able to get into this classes and we were talking about violence, about civil wars, and our former fighters shared with them their life experiences, and then for the young people there was the possibility to understand, of course, these experiences with the conflict, in order also then to understand concretely what happened. This is for us a very, very important part of our prevention work. And so then we were able to let young people reflect and address their own experiences, and this is of course a very important essential part of primary prevention. Yes, so if you wanted to work with former fighters from the Lebanese civil war, so which means in the tertiary prevention, of course, we needed to establish some precondition prerequisites for engagement of former fighters. So some years ago, so we had a workshop, we wanted to understand exactly what are the preconditions in order to involve this former fighters, and then we came to the conclusion that former fighters can be then applied, can be also then activated in all different areas and on different levels, but must be, of course, some basic prerequisites. An important thing is that, of course, they have gone through the exit process. So this process cannot be really ended because it's a very long process. Probably it's a process that takes for the whole life of these former fighters. But need, of course, to understand that violence and the war experiences are something that are going to be present for all their life. But of course, and maybe then we need also to have some other preconditions: social skills, empathy, communication skills, because this is something that we can apply to the former fighters, but also to other people as well. The important thing is that for the dropouts, there is no job description and there's a qualification. This is something that was very clear for us. But of course, then it's not always something that is clear then for the dropouts. For the dropouts, maybe then the ones that wanted to work and commit themselves in prevention work, of course, there's some people are so much then enthusiastic about that. And then what they wanted to do is that they want to do some things that are a bit problematic. So that's the reason why. Of course, that they can do that as a kind of voluntary work, but they cannot do it as a kind of a paid work, a full-time work. Of course, it will be important to acquire new additional qualifications, for example, then can be also then integration of dropouts in a professional team. And so they can also work as trainers, for example, in a professional team. Will be also then recommended, will be very nice to have also the kind of interdisciplinary professional team, because as I said, we do not always have then probably then the best psychologists or the best maybe social workers, but of course they can have some other very important qualifications, and it goes as they also bring it in their life experiences. This is of course essential. Yes, then former fighters, former extremists, of course, they have to meet different kind of challenges, to differentiate them between the institutional level and the individual level. Let's talk first about the institutional level. So if we're coming to Germany with Fighter for Peace, and if we want to maybe then to establish a kind of integration to the society, and we say just so we are here, so we're the former fighters, and we want to participate in the market, of course, sometimes so we have a big obstacles, so sometimes we're not understood, and so which means that there's a lack of trust of regular structures in the dropouts, and also then there's a kind of residual risk, and so there's a lack of risk from the side of institutions, so where we need of course to establish more trust, and trust as an institutional level must be given for granted, must be there. So this is something that of course we need to also then to further enhance. We have to create this trust, and we have also then to understand that with no trust we cannot work at no level. Now, the important thing is that we needed to educate and convince about the added value of alumni involvement. And then individual level, so for dropouts, of course, then they have their own challenges, and I should maybe then to focus on two different challenges. For example, if we work with dropouts in tertiary prevention, if they want to commit themselves within this prevention, let's talk maybe there's an IS dropout that wants to be active in prevention, tertiary prevention. Maybe it can happen that their war experiences are still emerging, and it's very difficult maybe to follow maybe then dialogues and also a conversation. There's a kind of flashbacks that come back. It's kind of a re-traumatization for dropouts during counseling work. This is something that may happen. It may happen, it does not happen every time. And another thing that may happen is that when we go to schools, then we have dropouts that are talking about their life experiences, and very often, of course, so we have a supervisor, we have also then other people then maybe then checking and monitoring everything, because there's a label as a dropout. Yes, this label that you receive because of course you are a former fighter, even if you want to work within the prevention sector, because as a foreign fighter, as a former extremist, even if you go to schools, it's very easy now that you get this label, because of course then they think you are from the extreme right wing, or maybe that you are a fighter's leader, and that's the reason why as a dropout you have also then to understand this kind of things. And very often, so you have to understand that you need to change your life. And then, of course, you have to understand that as a person, of course, an individual, you have to face a very difficult life, because this kind of extremist phase was part of your life, and this is something that you need to deal with for all your life. And that's the reason why we need to have a kind of strategy in order to overcome this kind of label as dropout. Yes. These are all the different experiences from my work, and also the practical experiences. The second part of my presentation is then focusing then on a kind of thought game. So we haven't maybe then finalized all this thought game, but I would like to try it out because I would like to talk about former fighters from Lebanon with IS-returnees, a kind of thought experiments. So tertiary prevention, the key to successful intervention is trust. This is absolutely important because actually there's not a single method that you need to apply in order to be successful. I know that in Germany there's systemic counseling work, which is particularly widespread, but there are many different approaches that have a particular added value, and then we have different kinds of targets, different kinds of approaches that can be discussed. As you all know, if you wanted to work in tertiary prevention or generally in the whole different prevention sectors, absolutely important to have trust. You have to create trust. If you do not build any trust, you will not able to do anything. And reaching target groups and building relationships may be better achieved through dropouts, since as former fighters than with normal professionals, so this is going to be, of course, easier because they have their particular background and they have the possibility to create trust with this target groups better than just normal than professional stuff, because I have maybe life experiences or more experiences to share, and that's the reason why then they have a particular context that maybe it can develop together. This is something that, of course, you cannot also expect from. If there's no trust, of course, it's not possible, because, of course, they can compare their life histories, their experiences. They can share the experience of radicalization, disengagement, dissociation, deradicalization, reintegration. And it's also very important that our groups can work together, so which means that even if they come from different political currents, our fighters are not only then coming from this kind of a political background, but they have also the religious backgrounds. But I have to say that if you're able then to interrupt these experiences, so you'll be able, of course, to avoid radicalization. You'll be able, of course, to foster reintegration. You'll be able also then to interrupt this kind of violence circle. And that if you wanted to keep distance from this group for different reasons, you want to be a dropout, all this kind of process is not easy to interrupt. And the important thing is that this kind of processes are then comparable, and I also believe that our former fighters know exactly how these processes can feel. They know exactly, because of course they know that this kind of new pathway is very difficult with other obstacles. They know difficulties in their way back to normal life. An important thing I want to stress out is that our former fighters have a relative impartiality towards IS-returnees, and so then they have to understand motivation, they have to understand their radicalization process, and they know that these fighters are still going these processes within their life. So, which means that very often, so then these are people that have suffered from violence and also then life-threatening situations. And that's the reason why they were not only fighters, but they were also then the victims of this kind of processes, where, of course, as I said, their life has been threatened. And I think that is also then a very important connecting element within the different groups with the former fighters and also with current fighters, as at least something that eases up communication. And I believe also that the peer level that you can achieve is absolutely very important in the counseling work. So then this peer level can also then done with some other fighters or former fighters can be expected from professional staff due to comparable life processes at peer level is established. And it is not possible to be, of course, granted by professionals, by, for example, German regular structures. That's why I believe that this peer level is essential, because it can create trust. It can also then create an emotional level. That's the reason why our former fighters can reach IS-returnees on emotional level, and that's why so they can also then reintegrate these people. I do not want, of course, to look down to professional stuff, but I just want to also to enhance, maybe then enhance rather than our work. Sorry because of this picture, so I've tried many times yesterday to set it up, but I was not able. Let's talk about now the added value for target group achieving. So IS supporters often do not accept the German state as an authority. This is something that we need also to consider. And they left Germany or maybe Europe to fill the gap, and that's the reason why. So then institutions and representatives of institutions and all different social workers can maybe then can work in a way in order to be accepted much more, because the former fighters are not accepting them so much. So that's why probably our former fighters can also then fill the gap that is then created by the non-accepted state structures, and that's the reason why we try to work in this sense. In addition, so if we're talking about IS-returnees with Arab roots, of course, there are comparable cultural, linguistic, and religious contexts. So then, even if these people have grown up in Europe, so they have Arab roots, and then if we need to work with these people, we have to understand that we need to have an intercultural competition, and because of course our former fighters don't know the language, the language, they know the religion, they know of course the cultural background. Another very important point about religion, Islam in Lebanon. So it's something that we can see, because religion belongs to every day, and we know that this kind of factors of religion, Islam, this religion is not a stigma for former fighters from Lebanon, but as I said, it belongs to normal daily life. Then a couple of words about the added value target group outreach 2. So about minors. Minors are not likely to be prosecuted. So these young IS members that have become members of this organization, and they have worked for this organization, and when they spent the first years of adolescence within this IS, and when they come to Europe, of course, they need to be integrated into school. And of course, these minors are not prosecuted, so which means that they are not in a place, they're not maybe then in a framework where they're dealt with, where they're taken care of. So how can you work with this minors, with this young people? And you can probably assume that these young people need to be integrated. They are not prosecuted, they're not prosecutable. And so the question is, how can we maybe then help these young people? How can we then work with them? The ideal thing would be to find a family for them, so in order to integrate them. And sometimes would be nice, of course, to integrate them into their family, into their relatives groups, so where there are no IS members. But I think that it is very important that these people can maybe process their life experiences, and we have to reach them on an emotional level. And so we have we have also some young former fighters in the German classes, and we know that the second important thing is that and then is that important that of course that these people and that these people need to be, of course, to be helped, to be supported, and very often our former fighters then can support then young IS-returnees, and that's the reason why that we could maybe then have this former young IS-returnees, and that's why so our former former fighters can help out a lot. In conclusion, as I said, so then former fighters can be involved in counseling and mentoring work in different steps and different phases in the primary, secondary, and tertiary prevention. They have a particular added value. They can also fill important gaps. And however, it's not a matter of replacing the already tried and tested counseling services with duplicate structures, but rather of supplementing them in optimizing way. And so we do not want, of course, to replace this kind of structures, but the important thing is that we can also then look beyond also our normal work in order to have a very excellent work. Thank you so much for listening.